people out there don't understand. But there is a need for the world to know about this, because the church is hiding and the government's hiding. There is a lot of people that died in those places.
When the Lord your God brings you into the land you are entering to possess, and drives out before you many nations, and you have defeated them, then you must destroy them totally. Make no treaty with them, and show them no mercy. Do not allow any of them to live. This is what you are to do to them. Break down their altars, smash their sacred stones, cut down their trees, and burn them in the fire. For you are a people chosen by the Lord over all others on the face of the earth.
God is on our side, we can commit any crime. We're absolved individually from that crime by believing that we have a higher sanction. And that's the danger of religion, in that it allows people to do that. It allows them to kill without a shred of conscience.
The church knows where our children are buried. 50,000 died.
Even in the sunlight, the Alberni Valley was draped in fog that first morning I arrived there in the spring of 1992. Jesus once said that when we welcome the stranger, we're actually welcoming him. But how could I have known that by opening my door to him and to so many others, I would be closing the door to all that I knew? Nothing was clear to me at first. I felt like I was on the brink of something, like standing on a dock, waiting. What was clear was that I was heading for a job interview at St. Andrew's United Church in Port Alberni, on Canada's west coast, where I hoped to become the minister. When I walked through the doors of that church, I knew there was a deeper purpose that had brought me there. And sure enough, I got the job.
There were no Native people in my church when I got there. You know, there was like 20 people in the pews on a Sunday, and they were all white. They were like retired loggers and millwrights, and about a third of the population was Native, and there were no Indians in any of the white churches. There were no Indians working in the stores anywhere, you know. It was just a totally apartheid, and it still is. It's very much an apartheid kind of community. And that's actually one of the things that got me interested. Just a little anecdote. When I went up at the end of the first service, I went up to the chair of my board and I said, you know, Fred, it's kind of odd there aren't any Indians around, you know, like where are they all? And he got really defensive and he said, well, they keep to themselves, we keep to ourselves, and everybody likes it that way. And so when I went out to I got called out to the local Seychat Reserve to conduct a wedding a few weeks later. I asked a man who I was marrying, Danny Gus his name was. He was a retired native fisherman and he had gone to the Alberni school. And I asked him kind of innocently why there were no Native people in church. And he finally said to me, they killed my best friend in the residential school. He's buried in the hill out back. And the church people all know it. They don't want us in their church. So it's kind of like right away, bang, it was in my face. This reality, these two worlds living side by side, not just Native and white, but kind of an official world, the official history, and then the unofficial buried history.
But Danny Gus wasn't the only Indian who told me of murders in my church's residential school. In my first year as minister at St. Andrews, I spent most of my time just visiting people and getting to know them. That was my job.
And my first job was really to open up my church to as many people as possible, including the Native population. In doing that, as more and more people came into the church, I gave them a platform. They began to talk about crimes they witnessed in the Alberni Residential School, which was run by the United Church for over 50 years. And they described children being killed. They described pedophile rings where children were being passed around between the Indian agent and the priest and other people like that. Yeah, I had an open pulpit policy, so after my sermon, people could get up and comment on it or share any of their own thoughts in that. And in the Native...
What did the whites do?
Well, the whites would get up, occasionally a logger would get up and defend the logging and that kind of thing. And, people had the chance to say whatever they wanted. And Native people in their tradition, they have like speakers who are officially delegated to talk. And so to give you an example, there was a man, Alfred Keatla, who got up and began praying in his own language in church, which was quite something. It was quite beautiful when he did that. But then as speaker, he began to talk about other things, and other people who got up would then share stories of children being murdered in the Alberni Residential School. That was later confirmed by a woman called Harriet Nahani, who actually witnessed a murder of a little girl by the principal of the Alberni School in 1946. Well, this fellow who Harriet claims killed a little girl called Maisie Shaw, his name was Alfred Caldwell, and his daughter was right in the congregation. She was part of the old guard of my church.
Did you believe it?
Well, when people who don't know one another keep telling the same story over and over again, even if you're skeptical, you have to accept the fact that, it's a commonly told story. And when people began to go further and tell me things that I found later being validated in documents, then you can't deny it. As a minister, you learn to detect bullshit pretty quickly in people. And you can tell in somebody's eyes when they're suffering, and it's incredibly painful for them to tell a story. They're not making this stuff up.
My name's Harry Wilson.
My name's Kenny Quittel.
My name is Virginia Baptiste. I'm from the Osuyas Indian Band in Oliver, BC.
My name is Harry Lucas. I'm actually 64 years old.
My name is Tibayut from the House of Tibayut of Achida.
My name is Nangkaiska. I come from the people of Haida Gwaii. My English name is Douglas Wilson. In academic circles, I'm known as Dr. Douglas Wilson.
I went to Aboriginal Residential School, 1959 to 1970.
I went to the residential school in Cranbrook, BC. My first year was 1955. I went until 1963.
I'm a survivor of the Edmonton Indian Residential School. I was there from 1957 to 1961.
At age 5, I was kidnapped by terrorists in a gunboat. The RCMP had this gunboat. It was a RCMP boat with a gun mounted on it to gather children from villages.
We were segregated right from the day one. I remember in September we were all on a beach and we were all given numbers.
When I first got to school in Cranbrook, we were all given a number. My number was 54, and my underwear, my socks, my uniform, my towels, everything that I had a number. It was 54 on there. And all the girls had their own numbers. And if you were caught with somebody else's number, you got whipped for that.
We weren't allowed to have books, and we weren't allowed to read. If you were caught reading any kind of a book or a magazine, you were punished. That was a severe punishment, that one.
The kids who told on us got preferential treatment, whereas the children who sang their songs and spoke their language were punished constantly. for any little thing, for even for laughing.
It was always hard for us to tell one another we love you, because we were taught to love was wrong. They told us to love was wrong, that was the devil's work. But yet, these priests and nuns could hug and kiss. And we couldn't even hug our own brothers. We couldn't even hold them and tell them we loved them. It took me a lot of years before I was able to tell my boys I loved them.
3 years it took me to realize it, though, you know, of torture and pain, you know, being strapped at a young. You know, I lost my childhood when I first got there and never knew what it was like to have parents. Still hurts. Sorry about that.
It's all right, you don't have to apologize.
But I never knew my mother, and still don't today.
I couldn't remember any good times that were there because I was being punished for things I'd never done.
Like what kind of punishment?
Punishment by restraining me to the bed, by putting a restrainer on me and holding me down in the bed. I had bed problems as wetting the bed, and they would tie me in bed and put an electric underneath my sheet so that when I did wet, I would electrocute myself.
Did they put you in a hospital?
Yes, I did. Well, yeah, you give me some drugs or something like that.
What kind? What happened to you?
I don't know what kind of drug it was.
What happened to you when they gave you the drugs?
Hey? Oh, they put me in there like a padded room. Padded room, like? All strapped down.
That was after you reported the girl?
Yeah.
Finding the girl's body?
Yeah.
I'd seen them burn hands of kids when they're 3 years old and 5 with a little spike in their hand and like that, like a shock thing.
Electric shock?
Yeah.
Device? Why did they shock the kids?
Because the kids wouldn't listen to the Catholic priest.
He used it on my brother's penis. He electrocuted his penis there till my brother passed out. And he was laughing, brother. My brother said he was laughing while he was doing it. You'd like to see him in pain, I guess.
And then the police force, I was involved in a few investigations regarding victims of residential school, where one particular individual had went home in the summer and learned how to speak his own language, and his dad had taught him how to carve. And he went back to school. He continued doing this, speaking his own language and carving. And the teacher caught him and took his knife away and broke his carving up. And he took a pencil and he drove it right through his hand. And you still see the scar where he drove the pencil right through his hand.
Then there was other times where they put us in a tub, and then they had a bucket of snakes, you know, them black and yellow snakes. And they'd throw that in the tub while we're having a bath. And the snakes they can't stand that hot water. They try to crawl all over our bodies, trying to get away from that hot water. And they'd all just curl up because they'd die immediately. And that was some of the horrifying things that they'd done to us to discipline us to keep quiet.
What had I got myself into? My whole world was being turned upside down. I had a young family to support. My children were still only infants. I couldn't put them at risk, which I would be if I let those stories be spoken from my pulpit. I didn't know what to believe or who to believe. I know I didn't want to believe these stories.
Well, when you went home at night with your family, your wife and 2 daughters, did you talk about this? Did they talk? Was this supper material to talk about?
No, I couldn't really share this around my kids or really my wife at the time. You know, for one thing, it was told in confidence, and another thing was it was a nightmare.
I needed help. I turned to the people who I thought would understand and support me, my colleagues in the church. That was a mistake. From top to bottom, the church denied that any children had been harmed in the residential schools.
Not only that, but church officials even threatened me to keep quiet about what I had been told. I was told to just stick to what they called being a good minister and tend to my flock. But that's what I thought I was doing by opening the doors of my church, even to Indians. And that's ultimately what the church found intolerable, that I was bringing that truth, into the pews on Sunday and letting those people who had been silenced for so long speak. And I'm still trying to do that in the work I do.
Well, didn't any of the church ministers sit down and sit with you and say, these are the rules and regulations, you're not to mess with the natives, and this is what happens?
They weren't that blatant, but they were subtle warnings I got. There was a fellow, Bill Howie, who was head of the church. He was kind of like the regional rep for the United Church on Vancouver Island. And he came over to me after my first presbytery meeting, which is where all the ministers get together a few times every year. And I made a comment at that meeting about how it was odd to me that there were no Native people in our churches and we should begin to look into the reason why. And Bill Howie came over and he sat down next to me, and with this big flashy smile, he said, you have a very promising career in the United Church and a young family to support. And if I were you, I'd be careful about comments and looking too much into the Native people. So
did you get it?
No, I mean, to me, that seemed very odd he would say that. And I didn't think, I was filled with illusions, and I thought, well, this is the Church of Christ. I mean, we're not going to stab each other in the back. I mean, I was very ignorant of our own history.
There's an establishment within the United Church in Port Alberni that set out to destroy Kevin Annett, and they set out by contacting those members, which I call the cliques in Port Alberni, bring them together and discredit Kevin Annett at all costs. Because what they had to lose was the fear of course, financial retribution from the Aboriginal people, but also they didn't want to hear about murders, and they didn't want to hear about abuses that took place with the Aboriginal people, because they felt that they'd had too much to lose. And let's face it, they would. Who would want to go to a church that abused Aboriginal kids, murdered Aboriginal kids?
When these stories began to be told, you could see some of the older white people visibly wincing and getting very uptight. And I didn't know at the time what it was about. It wasn't until subsequently that I learned that there was literal skeletons in the closet of the United Church, and they certainly didn't want them to come out.
I remember back in 1992 when Kevin first invited us, I got the impression from non-Aboriginal people that attended the service that this was all fine and dandy, but it's really made a lot of them feel uncomfortable, and I got that impression by talking to a lot of them. And in fact, one of the comments made by one of the churchgoers was that they couldn't understand why Kevin was reaching out to us, the Aboriginal people of the Alberni Valley. I understood why Kevin was doing it because there had been an alienation for a number of years, but I didn't know that the anti-Aboriginal congregation that existed there was so adamant that they didn't want anything to do with us.
What kind of people didn't they like?
Well, definitely not the poor. That one was obvious right off.
Well, there is a lot of racial discrimination.
Yeah, a lot of racial stuff. They didn't want natives in the church.
And as Kevin developed the food bank and developed a dialogue about the murders that took place in residential schools, I suddenly saw firsthand the attacks that started to come towards Kevin. It first started out as whispers, and I remember hearing from people in the Alberni Valley who used to go to the coffee shops that Kevin Annett was opening up a can of worms he shouldn't be opening up, and how dare he.
Which is why I was removed so quickly. I was just summarily fired from my job without any cause, without any due process or anything.
On January 23rd, 1995, after nearly 3 years as minister of St. Andrew's United Church, Kevin Annett was fired without cause or notice by 2 officials of the United Church, without the knowledge or consent of his congregation. Kevin was told by one of these officials, Art Anderson, that there were no charges against him and that he was not under discipline, but that nevertheless he had to submit to what Anderson called, quote, pastoral retraining and psychiatric evaluation if he was to remain a United Church minister. Anderson provided no evidence to support these requirements. At the time of Kevin's firing, his church was filled to capacity on Sunday mornings, and Kevin had just received a vote of approval for his work and ministry by 90% of his congregation.
I had no idea that it would blow up in my life to the extent that it did. I was a total innocent walking into a minefield. I thought, okay, the worst that could come out of this is they'll reprimand me and remove me and send me to another church. That's the worst that can happen. That's what I figured.
Was this your own conclusion, or did you arrive at that with your family? You just
no, I just realized that that's how you deal with a minister who doesn't fit, as they say, with his congregation, which I know is bullshit because I fit with most people there. But I knew in the power politics of the church, it's always a minority who hold the power. And these people who were the old guard, who were connected with the people who had run the residential school, who were scared shitless of Indians, who had the guilty conscience, those were the ones who had the ear of the higher-ups in the church. And I knew they were going to remove me. But I thought that they would simply, do the whole re-education thing and say, well, you got to go and retrain, and then you can have another church. But I realized pretty quickly when all of this stuff started happening that they wanted me out. They didn't want me. It was kind of like, the Matrix when the plugs start flying out of Neo, right? Like the system looks at him and go, whoa, he's not going to fit. Flush. And they flushed me.
Kevin was a thorn in the side of the establishment, and one of the meetings that I was made aware of, it came up, well, if you want to really get rid of Kevin Annett, then what you do is you attack his wife and children. And how you attack the wife and children is you put a lot of pressure on them and say that the longer Kevin Annett continues with disclosing these murders and continuing working with the Aboriginal people, the harder it's going to be for you to feel socially acceptable in the community. And your husband shouldn't be doing this. And if your husband continues to do this, there's going to be ramifications for you and your daughters.
I didn't think that they were going to eventually, basically destroy my life, get rid of my livelihood, and help break up my family, which they did.
Where did your family? Did you talk this over with your family? Where that was church business? You didn't talk with her?
Well,
your
eventually, when with my wife Anne, who my ex-wife now, I began to share a lot of stuff with her, and she was getting really scared about all this stuff. But what happened was, after I was fired, they went to her, and they actually offered to pay for her divorce and help her if she provided them with information. And in fact, subsequently, they gave her documents which tried to make me look like I was mentally unstable, which she used in divorce court, and she got custody of our 2 young daughters as a result. So the fact that the church would do that would actually help in the divorce to get my kids taken away from me. The fact that they would spend $250,000 to throw me out of the church, that was all telling me and other people a lot of stuff. That was telling me that there's a much bigger agenda here. They're scared and they want me out and silenced by any means necessary. So you don't just do that to somebody who has, offended the congregation or who isn't a good minister. You don't go to that extent unless there's some other thing you're trying to hide, and that was clearly about these murdered kids and the stolen land.
I witnessed the death of Maisie Shaw.
You have as much right to call yourselves Christians as the members of the Inquisition. Where is your apology? Where did you bury the children?
But this is where we found those, we seen those little skulls.
You found them in here?
We found them in here. There was coal, like coal. See, we weren't allowed to come here.
Never at any point when I was pleading with them to stop what they were doing to my family and I, even on that level of just how it impacted me personally, there wasn't a shred of humanity in them. They were like...
You were looking in their eyes, nothing there.
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So you know what? When that happened to me, I realized up until then, like any of us, it's somewhat abstract. People tell you stories and you keep wondering, well, how could they do this? When I saw what they were able to do to me, one of their own, when they turned and shredded my life mercilessly and allowed my 6- and 2-year-old daughters to go through hell, I thought, if they could do that to me, imagine what they could do to a native child who wasn't a Christian, who was dark-skinned, who wasn't part of them. Of course they could kill them.
So I watched, and she was standing at the top of the stairs, and he kicked her. She went rolling downstairs. She ended up, she was laying like this. Her eyes were open, but she wasn't moving. She wasn't crying. So I see that all the time.
Her name was Maggie. She was 2 years older than me. And she was murdered in there by a nun. She pushed out the window. Second story up, and she died. But nothing was done about it. We weren't allowed to see a lawyer or nothing.